The clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m. when Marcus Chen pushed his cleaning cart down the long hallway of the 40th floor. The wheels made a soft squeaking sound on the marble floor. This was the top floor of Hartwell Industries, where all the important people worked during the day. At night it was empty and quiet, like a ghost town made of glass and steel. Marcus wore a blue uniform with his name tag pinned to his chest. His black hair was neat, and his brown eyes looked tired. He had been working as a janitor for 2 years now. Every night he came to this building when everyone else went home. While the city slept, he cleaned the offices of people who made more money in one day than he made in a whole year. He stopped at the first office and took out his keys. The jangling sound echoed in the empty hallway. Marcus unlocked the door and turned on the lights. This office belonged to Mr. Peterson, the head of sales. Marcus had never met him, but he knew Mr. Peterson liked coffee. There were always many coffee cups on his desk and coffee stains on important papers. Marcus emptied the trash can and wiped down the desk. He was careful with the papers. He knew they were important, even if he did not understand what they said. As he cleaned, he thought about his day job hunt. He had sent out 20 resumes this week. Not one company had called him back. The next office was bigger. It belonged to Mrs. Williams, the head of human resources. Her office had many plants, and Marcus always watered them. He liked taking care of the plants. They were the only living things in this cold building at night. As he dusted the leaves of a small tree, he wondered if Mrs. Williams knew that someone cared for her plants every night. Marcus had a secret that nobody at Hartwell Industries knew. He had a business degree from State University. He had graduated 3 years ago with good grades. He had dreams of working in a big company like this one, but not as a janitor. He wanted to be in meetings, making decisions, helping the company grow, but life had other plans for him. His mother got sick right after he graduated. The doctors said she needed expensive treatment. The medicine cost more money than Marcus had ever seen. His father had left when Marcus was young, so it was just Marcus and his mother. He had to choose between his dreams and his family. For Marcus, there was no choice at all, so he took the first job he could find. It was not the job he wanted, but it paid enough to help his mother. Every month, most of his money went to doctors and medicine. The rest went to rent and food. There was never enough left over to buy nice clothes for job interviews or to take classes that might help him get a better job. Marcus finished cleaning Mrs. Williams's office and moved to the next one. This hallway had 6 offices, and he cleaned, each one the same way. Empty trash, dust furniture, vacuum carpet, clean windows. He had done this so many times that his hands moved without thinking. His mind was free to wander. He thought about his mother. She was getting better slowly. The treatment was working, but it would take at least 2 more years. 2 more years of night shifts. 2 more years of being invisible to the people who walked these halls during the day. 2 more years of putting his dreams on hold. The last office on this hallway was different. It was much bigger than the others, with a view of the whole city. Marcus could see the lights of cars moving on the streets below, like tiny stars in a river of darkness. This office belonged to someone very important. The nameplate on the door said Richard Hartwell III, Chief Executive Officer. Marcus had seen Mr. Hartwell a few times. He was a tall man with gray hair who always wore expensive suits. He walked fast and talked loud on his phone. He never looked at the janitors. To him, they were part of the building, like the elevators or the air conditioning. Useful but not worth noticing. Marcus unlocked the CEO's office and stepped inside. The room was huge. One wall was all windows, showing the city lights. Another wall had shelves filled with books and awards. The desk was made of dark wood and was bigger than Marcus's entire kitchen at home. But what caught Marcus's attention was something in the corner of the room. It was a grand piano, black and shiny, sitting under a spotlight. Marcus stopped moving and stared at it. He had not seen a real piano in 3 years. Marcus walked slowly toward the piano, his cleaning forgotten. The instrument was beautiful, like a piece of art. The wood was so polished that he could see his reflection in it. He looked around the office to make sure he was alone, then reached out and gently touched one of the keys. The sound was perfect, clear and rich. Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. He pressed another key, then another. Soon, his fingers were moving across the keys, playing a simple song his mother had taught him when he was a child. The music filled the empty office and spilled out into the hallway. For a moment, Marcus forgot where he was. He was not a janitor in a blue uniform. He was just a person making music, letting his feelings flow through his fingers onto the keys. Marcus had learned to play piano when he was 6 years old. His mother had saved money for months to buy him lessons. She said music was important, that it fed the soul when the body was hungry. Marcus had been good at it, very good. In high school, he had won competitions. His teacher said he could study music. In college, maybe become a professional musician. But Marcus had chosen business instead. Music was beautiful, but it did not pay well. He wanted to take care of his mother when she got old. Business seemed like a safer choice, a smarter choice. Now, sitting at this piano in an empty office, he wondered if he had made the right decision. The song ended and Marcus sat in silence for a moment. The office felt different now, warmer somehow. He looked at his watch and realized he had been playing for 10 minutes. He needed to finish his work and move on to the next floor. Marcus stood up and closed the piano lid gently. He picked up his cleaning supplies and went back to work. As he dusted the CEO's desk, he felt lighter than he had in months. The music had reminded him of something important. Dreams might be delayed, but they did not have to die. He finished cleaning the office and pushed his cart toward the elevator. Tomorrow night he would be back. And maybe if the office was empty and quiet, he would play the piano again. Just for a few minutes. Just to remember who he used to be and who he might be again someday. The elevator doors closed, and Marcus rode down to the next floor. He did not know that his life was about to change forever. Richard Hartwell III sat in the back of his black car talking loudly into his phone. The leather seats were soft and expensive, and the car smelled like new money. Outside, the city lights blurred past as his driver took him home from another business dinner. "Johnson, I don't care what the board thinks," Richard said into his phone. "We're cutting the budget for employee programs. These people should be grateful they have jobs at all." He ended the call and looked at his gold watch. It was almost midnight. Richard was 45 years old and worth $500 million. He owned the biggest building in the city and had houses in 3 different countries. People called him Sir, and waiters in expensive restaurants knew his name. He had everything money could buy, but he was not a happy man. His father had built Hartwell Industries from nothing. His grandfather had been a poor farmer. But Richard had been born rich, and he thought that made him better than other people. He believed that poor people were poor because they were lazy or stupid. He never thought about how lucky he had been to be born into money. The car stopped in front of the Hartwell Industries building. "Sir, did you forget something?" asked the driver. "Yes, Thompson. I left some papers in my office. Wait here." Richard got out of the car and walked toward the building. The night guard recognized him and quickly opened the door. "Good evening, Mr. Hartwell," said the guard, whose name was Pete. Pete had worked at the building for 15 years, but Richard had never learned his name. Richard did not answer. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the 40th floor. The elevator was quiet and fast, carrying him up to his kingdom in the sky. The hallway was dark except for the security lights. Richard's expensive shoes made clicking sounds on the marble floor. He liked being in the building at night. It reminded him that he owned all of this, that hundreds of people worked for him. As he got closer to his office, Richard heard something strange. It was music, piano music, coming from his office. He stopped walking and listened. Someone was playing his piano, the one that cost more than most people made in a year. Richard felt angry. Who would dare to touch his things? He walked faster, toward his office, his face getting red. The music was beautiful, but that did not matter. Someone was in his private office without permission. He reached his office door and looked inside. A man in a blue janitor uniform was sitting at the piano, playing with his eyes closed. The man looked young, maybe 30, with black hair and clean hands. He was playing a sad, beautiful song that made Richard think of rain on windows. For a moment, Richard just watched. The janitor played like he had been doing it his whole life. His fingers moved across the keys like water flowing over rocks. The music filled the room and seemed to make everything glow. But then Richard remembered who he was and got angry again. This was his office, his piano, his building. This janitor had no right to be here, touching his expensive things with his poor person hands. Richard stepped into the office and cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me," he said in a cold voice. Marcus stopped playing immediately and turned around. His face went white when he saw Richard standing in the doorway. Marcus stood up quickly and stepped away from the piano. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hartwell," Marcus said quietly. "I was just cleaning your office and you thought you would help yourself to my piano?" Richard walked into the room, his eyes narrow and mean. "Do you know how much that piano cost?" "More than you make in 5 years, I bet." Marcus looked down at his feet. "I'm very sorry, sir, it won't happen again." Richard looked at Marcus like he was looking at a bug. The janitor was young and clean, not like the old dirty janitors Richard expected to see. This made him even more angry. Young people should know better. "What's your name?" Richard demanded. "Marcus Chen, sir." "Well, Marcus Chen, do you think... This is a music school. Do you think I pay you to play piano?" Richard's voice was getting louder. "No, sir, I know you don't. I was wrong." Richard walked around Marcus like a cat circling a mouse. He noticed that Marcus stood straight and looked him in the eye even though he was scared. Most people looked away when Richard was angry, but this janitor did not. "You know what I think, Marcus?" Richard said with a mean smile. "I think you watch too many movies. You think you're some kind of hidden genius, don't you? You think if you play piano in my office, I'll discover your talent and make you rich." Marcus did not answer, but his hands made fists at his sides. Richard laughed, a cold sound with no happiness in it. "That's exactly what you think, isn't it? Poor janitor boy thinks he's special." He walked over to his desk and sat down in his big leather chair. "Tell me, Marcus, where did you learn to play piano? Did you take lessons at the community center?" "I learned when I was young," Marcus said quietly. "Oh, how sweet." Mommy saved her pennies to give little Marcus piano lessons. Richard was enjoying himself now. He liked making people feel small. It made him feel bigger. Marcus's face changed when Richard mentioned his mother. A flash of anger crossed his eyes, but he controlled himself. Richard saw the anger and smiled wider. "Did I hit a nerve? Is Mommy still alive? Does she know her son is just a janitor who plays other people's pianos?" "My mother is sick," Marcus said, his voice tight with control. "That's why I work here, to pay for her medicine." "How sad," Richard said, but he did not sound sad at all. A sick mother and a son who cleans toilets for a living. What a beautiful story. Marcus stood very still, but Richard could see he was trying hard not to say something he would regret. Richard stood up and walked back to the piano. He ran his finger along the top, then looked at it like he was checking for dust. "You know what, Marcus? I'm feeling generous tonight. I'm going to give you a chance to prove you're not just another dreamer." Marcus looked confused. "Sir?" Richard turned around with a big, fake smile. "I'm going to make you a deal. If you can play something that actually impresses me, really impresses me, I'll make you CEO of this company. Imagine that. CEO Marcus Chen. You'll have more money than you ever dreamed of, enough to buy all the medicine your mother needs." Marcus stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Richard said. "But here's the catch. When you fail, and you will fail, you're fired. Not just from the night shift, fired completely. You'll never work in this building again." Richard pulled out his phone and started recording. "I want to capture this moment. The moment when Marcus Chen, genius janitor, shows the world his amazing talent." Marcus looked at the piano, then back at Richard. He knew this was a trap. Richard was making fun of him, trying to humiliate him. But Marcus also knew something Richard did not know. Marcus really could play piano very well. "Well?" Richard said. "Do you accept my generous offer?" Or are you going to admit you're just another dreamer who cleans up after his betters? Marcus thought about his mother lying in her hospital bed. He thought about the bills that came every month. He thought about all the job applications that were never answered. He had nothing left to lose. Marcus looked Richard straight in the eye. I accept your deal, Mr. Hartwell, but I choose what to play. Richard laughed out loud. Perfect. This is going to be even better than I thought. Please, Marcus, show me what you've got. Entertain me. Marcus walked back to the piano and sat down. He placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes for a moment. Richard kept recording with his phone, already planning how he would tell this story to his rich friends at the country club. Neither man knew that this moment would change both of their lives forever. Marcus sat at the piano bench and felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. His hands rested on the keys, but he did not play yet. He needed a minute to think about what he was doing. Behind him, Richard held his phone up, recording everything. Richard's face showed excitement like a child watching a circus act. He thought he was about to see Marcus fail in front of him, and the idea made him happy. Come on, Marcus, Richard said with fake kindness. Don't keep me waiting. I'm a busy man, you know. Show me this amazing talent of yours. Marcus turned around to look at Richard. You promise that if I impress you, you'll make me CEO? Richard laughed. I promise, cross my heart and hope to die. He made an X over his chest with his finger, like a child making a fake promise. But when you fail, and trust me, you will fail, you're out of here forever. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood the deal. Win everything or lose everything. There was no middle ground. What are you going to play for me? Richard asked. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, maybe happy birthday? Marcus did not answer the joke. Instead, he said, I'm going to play Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. Richard's smile got smaller. He had heard of Chopin, of course. Rich people were supposed to know about classical music, but he did not know what a ballade was, and he had never heard of this particular piece. Sounds fancy, Richard said, trying to sound like he knew what Marcus was talking about. Is that the best you can do? Marcus turned back to the piano. It's one of the hardest pieces ever written for piano. Most professional piano players can't play it well. Perfect, Richard said. When you mess it up, no one can say I didn't. Give you a fair chance. Marcus placed his fingers on the keys again. He thought about the piece he was going to play. He had learned it in college, before his mother got sick, before his dreams got put away in a box. It was a piece that told a story of love and loss, of dreams and disappointment, of beauty that comes from sadness. The music would last about 10 minutes. 10 minutes to change his life. 10 minutes to show Richard Hartwell that he was wrong about everything. But as Marcus sat there, ready to play, he heard footsteps in the hallway. The night cleaning crew was working on this floor. There were 5 other janitors who worked the same shift as Marcus. They were good people who worked hard for small paychecks. Marcus heard their voices getting closer. Rosa, who had 3 children, and spoke English with a thick accent. James, who was 60 years old and had been cleaning offices for 20 years. Maria, who was saving money to bring her sister to America. David, who was working 2 jobs to pay for his daughter's school. And Susan, who took care of her old father. What's that music? He heard Rosa ask in Spanish. It's coming from the big boss's office, James answered. The footsteps stopped outside Richard's office. Marcus knew his friends were listening. They probably thought someone had left a radio on, or maybe the CEO was having a late meeting with music. Richard noticed the voices too. Looks like you have an audience, he said with a mean smile. Even better. When you fail, everyone will see it. But Marcus felt different about the audience. These people were his friends. They worked together every night, sharing stories and jokes to make the hard work easier. They knew about his mother, about his struggles. They had never asked him why he was so young for a janitor, or why he sometimes looked sad when he thought no one was watching. Marcus made a decision. He was not just playing for Richard anymore. He was playing for his friends in the hallway. He was playing for his mother in her hospital bed. He was playing for every person who had ever been told they were not good enough, not smart enough, not important enough. "Are you ready?" Richard asked. "I don't have all night." Marcus looked at him. "I'm ready. But before I play, I want to make something clear. When I impress you, and I will impress you, I want the CEO job in writing. I want a contract." Richard's eyebrows went up. "My word isn't good enough for you?" "I want it in writing," Marcus said again. Richard thought this was funny. The janitor actually believed he could win. "Fine," Richard said. "I'll write it down." He walked to his desk and took out a piece of paper. He wrote quickly and showed it to Marcus. The paper said, "If Marcus Chen impresses me with his piano playing, I will make him CEO of Hartwell Industries. Signed, Richard Hartwell III." Richard signed it with a gold pen and put it on the piano. "There you go. Your ticket to the top. Too bad you'll never get to use it." Marcus looked at the paper, then at Richard. "You'll regret making fun of me." "I doubt that," Richard said. "But please entertain me. Play your little song." Marcus turned to face the piano. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In his mind, he could see his mother's face when the doctors first told them she was sick. He could remember the fear in her eyes and the way she tried to be brave for him. He thought about all the nights he had worked in this building, invisible to the people who made decisions during the day. He thought about all the resumes he had sent out, all the jobs he had applied for, all the doors that had been closed in his face. But he also thought about music. He thought about the first time his mother had taken him to hear a piano concert when he was 8 years old. He remembered how the music had made him feel like he was flying, like he was part of something bigger than himself. Music had been his first love, before business school, before job hunting, before medical bills. Music was the language his soul spoke when words were not enough. Marcus opened his eyes and placed his hands on the keys. The first note rang out clear and pure, filling the office with sound. Richard stopped smiling. The note was perfect, exactly right. Then Marcus began to play. The melody started soft and gentle, like a whisper or a memory. His left hand played a simple rhythm, while his right hand told the story. The music was Chopin, but it was also Marcus. Every note carried his feelings, his hopes, his pain. In the hallway, the cleaning crew stopped talking. Rosa put down her mop. James stopped pushing his cart. They all stood still, listening to something they had never heard before. Richard's phone was still recording, but his hand was starting to shake. This was not what he had expected. This was not a janitor trying to show off. This was real music, beautiful music, the kind that made people stop everything and listen. Marcus played like his life depended on it, because it did. His fingers moved across the keys with perfect control, playing notes that seemed impossible to play. The music got louder and more exciting, like a story building to its most important moment. Richard found himself leaning forward in his chair, his mouth slightly open. He had heard piano music before at fancy parties and concert halls, but he had never heard anything like this. This music seemed to reach inside him and touch something he had forgotten was there. The janitor in the blue uniform was disappearing, and in his place was an artist, a musician, a person with a gift that Richard could never buy with all his money. As the music continued, Richard began to realize something that scared him. He was wrong. He was completely, totally wrong. The music filled every corner of the office like water filling a glass. Marcus's fingers moved across the piano keys with the grace of a dancer and the power of a storm. Each note was perfect, clear as a bell ringing in the morning air. Richard stood frozen behind his desk, still holding his phone. The camera was recording, but Richard had forgotten all about it. His eyes were wide and his mouth hung open slightly. This was not the embarrassing show he had expected to see. This was something else entirely. The melody grew stronger and more complex. Marcus's left hand played deep, rich notes that sounded like a heartbeat, while his right hand danced across the higher keys, telling a story without words. The music rose and fell like waves on the ocean, sometimes gentle, sometimes powerful. In the hallway, the 5 janitors pressed closer to the office door. Rosa had tears in her eyes. She had never heard anything so beautiful in her whole life. James, who was old and had seen many things, felt young again as he listened. The music reminded him of his wife, who had died 2 years ago, and how she used to hum while she cooked dinner. Maria whispered a prayer in Spanish. She felt like she was in church listening to angels sing. David thought about his daughter and how proud he would be if she could make music like this. Susan just stood there with her eyes closed, letting the music wash over her like warm rain. Inside the office, Richard felt something happening to him that he did not understand. The music was changing him, note by note. For the first time in many years, he was not thinking about money or power or business deals. He was just listening, really listening to something beautiful. Marcus played with his whole body. His shoulders moved with the rhythm, his head nodded with the beat, and his foot pressed the pedals to make the sound richer and deeper. Every part of him was focused on the music, on making each note perfect. The piece Marcus was playing told a story. It started with a simple, beautiful melody like a young person's dreams. Then the music became more complicated, with difficult parts that showed the struggles of life. There were moments of great joy and moments of deep sadness, all woven together like threads in a beautiful carpet. Richard began to understand that he was listening to Marcus's life story, told in music. The gentle beginning was Marcus as a child, learning to play piano, full of hope and dreams. The more difficult parts were the struggles he had faced, the choices he had to make, the dreams he had to put aside. As the music continued, Richard found himself thinking about his own life. He remembered being young and having dreams too. Before he inherited his father's company, he had wanted to be a teacher. He had loved books and learning, and he had imagined himself helping young people discover new ideas. But his father had laughed at that dream. "Teachers are poor," his father had said. "We are rich. You will run the company and make more money." So Richard had put away his books and learned about business instead. He had never thought about that dream again until now. The music was getting more intense. Marcus's fingers flew across the keys so fast they seemed to blur. But every note was still perfect, still exactly where it should be. This was not just talent, this was years of practice, years of dedication, years of love for music. Richard realized that Marcus must have studied music seriously. This was not something you learned in a few casual lessons. This required the kind of training that cost money. Lots of money. How had a janitor afforded this kind of education? The questions made Richard uncomfortable. He was starting to understand that he knew nothing about Marcus Chen. He had looked at the blue uniform and made assumptions. He had seen a janitor and decided Marcus was not worth his attention. But what if he was wrong? What if there was much more to Marcus than Richard had ever imagined? The music reached a climactic moment where both hands played together in perfect harmony, creating sounds that seemed impossible for one person to make. The piano sang like a choir of voices, each note adding to a symphony of emotion. Other people in the building were starting to notice the music too. The security guard on the first floor heard it through the air vents and wondered where it was coming from. A few floors down, a lawyer working late looked up from his papers and listened. Even outside, people walking on the street stopped and looked up at the building, trying to figure out where the beautiful music was coming from. Richard felt his eyes getting wet. When was the last time he had cried? He could not remember. Maybe when his father died, but even then, he had been too busy with the funeral arrangements and the business to really feel sad. Now, listening to this music, he felt emotions he had locked away for years. The music told the story of every person who had ever struggled, ever hoped, ever dreamed of something better. It spoke of mothers who loved their children, of young people who wanted to make the world better, of workers who deserved respect and dignity. Marcus played a section that was so sad and beautiful that Rosa in the hallway put her hand over her heart. The melody seemed to cry, but it was not giving up. Even in the sadness, there was strength, there was hope, there was the promise that tomorrow might be better. Richard thought about all the employees in his building. How many of them had stories like Marcus? How many had dreams they had given up? How many were working jobs they did not love to take care of people they did love? How many talents was he missing because he never bothered to really see the people who worked for him? The music changed again, becoming lighter and more hopeful. It was like sunrise after a long, dark night. Marcus's face showed the same hope that lived in the music. Even though he was tired, even though he had faced disappointments, he had not given up. The music proved that his spirit was still strong. Richard found himself sitting down in his chair, not because he was tired, but because the music was so powerful, it made his knees weak. He had heard famous musicians play in concert halls that cost thousands of dollars to build. He had heard orchestras with 100 musicians. But nothing had ever moved him like this one man playing alone in an office at midnight. The recording on his phone continued, but Richard was no longer thinking about showing this to his friends as a joke. This was not a joke. This was art. Real. Art. The kind that changed people. As the music built toward another crescendo, Richard realized something that shocked him. Marcus was not just playing well, he was playing better than most professional musicians Richard had ever heard. This was the level of skill that took decades to develop. This was world-class talent sitting right in front of him, wearing a janitor's uniform. How had he missed this? How had a person with this much ability ended up cleaning his office? What had happened in Marcus's life to bring him here? The question swirled in Richard's mind as the music swirled around the room. For the first time in his adult life, Richard, Hartwell III, realized that he might be about to learn something important about himself, about other people, and about what really mattered in life. The music was far from over, and neither was the lesson. The music reached its most challenging section, and Marcus's hands moved like lightning across the keys. His fingers seemed to dance independently, each one finding exactly the right note at exactly the right moment. The sound that came from the piano was so rich and complex that it seemed impossible for one instrument to create. Richard watched Marcus's face as he played. The janitor's eyes were closed, and his expression showed complete concentration mixed with pure joy. This was not work for Marcus, this was freedom. This was who he really was when no one was watching, when he did not have to pretend to be just a simple cleaning man. The melody told a story of struggle and triumph. In the music, Richard could hear the sound of dreams being born, then crushed, then rebuilt stronger than before. He could hear the voice of someone who had faced disappointment but refused to give up hope. As Marcus played, Richard began to see things about him that he had never noticed before. Marcus's hands were not rough and dirty like Richard had expected. They were clean and strong, with long fingers perfect for playing piano. His posture was straight and confident, not bent over like someone who had given up on life. Looking more closely, Richard noticed that Marcus was younger than most janitors. He was probably in his late 20s, an age when most people were just starting their careers, not cleaning offices at night. Why was someone so young, someone with such obvious talent, working as a janitor? The music grew more intense, and Marcus began to sweat slightly from the effort. Playing this piece was like running a marathon. It required not just skill, but incredible physical and mental stamina. The fact that Marcus could play it so perfectly showed years of serious training. In the hallway, more people had gathered. Word was spreading through the building that something amazing was happening on the 40th floor. The security guard had come up to investigate. 2 lawyers who were working late had left their offices to listen. Even the building maintenance supervisor had stopped his rounds to hear the music. Everyone stood quietly, afraid to make any noise that might disturb the performance. They had never heard anything like this in their workplace. The cold, businesslike building had been transformed into a concert hall. Richard found himself thinking about his own life as he listened. He remembered being Marcus's age, full of energy and ideas. Back then, he had believed he could change the world. He had wanted to make the company better, to treat employees fairly, to create something meaningful. But somewhere along the way, Richard had become cynical. He had started to believe that people were lazy and needed to be pushed to work hard. He had forgotten that everyone had dreams and talents and stories worth hearing. The music showed Richard a different way of thinking. About people. Marcus was not just a janitor. He was a complete person with a history, with education, with abilities that Richard had never bothered to discover. How many other employees were there like Marcus? How many talented people was Richard wasting because he never looked beyond their job titles? Marcus reached the most difficult part of the piece, where both hands had to play completely different melodies at the same time. It was like watching someone write poetry with one hand, while solving math problems with the other. The level of coordination required was almost superhuman. Richard had studied business in college, and he knew how rare real talent was. Companies spent millions of dollars trying to find and keep talented people. Yet here was extraordinary talent working in his building every night, and he had never even noticed. The music told Marcus's story without words. Richard could hear the sound of a young boy learning to play piano, practicing for hours every day. He could hear the pride of parents watching their son perform in school concerts. He could hear the excitement of a teenager winning music competitions, but then the music changed, becoming sadder and more complex. Richard could hear the sound of difficult choices being made. He could hear dreams being put aside for more important things like family responsibilities. He could hear the pain of a talented person taking a job that did not use his gifts. As he listened, Richard began to understand what might have happened to Marcus. Something had forced him to give up music and take whatever job he could find. Maybe his family needed money. Maybe someone he loved was sick. Maybe he had been forced to choose between his dreams and his responsibilities. The thought made Richard feel ashamed. Here he was, a man who had inherited everything he owned, making fun of someone who was working hard to take care of his family. Richard had never had to make difficult choices about money. He had never had to put his dreams aside to help someone else. Marcus played a section that was so beautiful it made several people in the hallway wipe tears from their eyes. The melody soared like a bird flying high above the clouds, free and joyful, despite everything that had tried to keep it down. Richard realized that this was what he was really hearing, the sound of a spirit that refused to be broken. Marcus might be working as a janitor, but his music proved that he had not given up on beauty, on art, on the things that made life worth living. The music began to build toward its final climax. Marcus's whole body was involved now, swaying with the rhythm, his feet working the pedals to add depth and richness to the sound. Every part of him was focused on creating something perfect. Richard found himself standing up without realizing. The music was so powerful that he could not sit still. He felt like he was watching something historic, something that would change him forever. In the hallway, the growing crowd was completely silent. Rosa was crying openly now, not caring. Who saw her? James had taken off his hat in respect, like he was in church. The security guard stood at attention, as if he was listening to the national anthem. Even people in other parts of the building had stopped what they were doing. The music traveled through the air conditioning system, through the walls, through the very structure of the building. It seemed to touch everyone who heard it. Marcus reached the final section of the piece, where all the themes came together in a glorious celebration of melody and harmony. His hands moved with impossible speed and precision, creating music that seemed to lift everyone who heard it up into the sky. Richard felt something breaking open inside his chest. It was not his heart. It was something harder and colder that had been protecting his heart for years. All the walls he had built between himself and other people were crumbling as he listened to this beautiful music. For the first time in decades, Richard Hartwell III felt truly humble. He was in the presence of something greater than money, greater than power, greater than anything he had ever thought was important. He was in the presence of pure human talent and dedication and love. The music was almost over, but Richard knew that when it ended, nothing would ever be the same again. Not for him, not for Marcus, and not for anyone else who had been lucky enough to hear this incredible performance. As the final notes approached, Richard realized that he was about to face the most important moment of his life. He had made a promise, and now he was going to have to decide whether he was a man of his word. The final notes of the piece rang out like church bells on a quiet Sunday morning. Marcus's hands came to rest on the keys, and slowly, the music faded into silence. The only sound in the office was the soft hum of the air conditioning and Marcus's quiet breathing. For a long moment, nobody moved. Marcus sat at the piano with his eyes still closed, as if he was afraid to open them and return to the real world. In the hallway, the crowd of listeners stood frozen, not wanting to break the spell that the music had created. Richard stood behind his desk, his phone forgotten in his hand. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with shock. The recording had captured everything, but Richard was no longer thinking about showing it to anyone. What he had just witnessed was too precious, too personal to share as entertainment. Slowly, Marcus opened his eyes and turned around to face Richard. His face showed exhaustion but also peace, like someone who had just run a long race and crossed the finish line. He had given everything he had to that performance, holding nothing back. "Well?" Marcus asked quietly. His voice was hoarse, as if the music had taken all his energy. Richard tried to speak, but no words came out. His throat felt tight and his chest felt heavy. He had prepared cruel jokes and harsh criticism, but now all of that seemed impossible. How could anyone make fun of what he had just heard? Marcus stood up from the piano bench and faced Richard directly. Even though he was still wearing his janitor's uniform, he looked different now. The music had revealed who he really was underneath the blue shirt and name tag. He was not just a cleaner. He was an artist, a musician, a person of extraordinary talent. "Did I impress you?" Marcus asked. There was no pride in his voice, just a simple question. He knew he had played well, but he also knew that Richard was not an easy man to please. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at Marcus, then at the piano, then back at Marcus. His whole world had been turned upside down in the space of 10 minutes. Richard started, then stopped. He had spent his whole life being confident, always knowing what to say in any situation. But now he felt like a child who had just seen magic for the first time. In the hallway, Rosa whispered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. James wiped his eyes with his sleeve. The security guard stood with his mouth open, staring at the office door as if he could still see the music floating in the air. Richard walked slowly around his desk toward Marcus. With each step, he felt like he was seeing the young man more clearly. This was not the lazy, uneducated janitor that Richard had imagined. This was someone who had trained for years, someone who had dedicated his life to mastering something beautiful and difficult. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Richard asked. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I studied music at Juilliard for 2 years," Marcus said simply. Richard felt like he had been hit by lightning. Juilliard was one of the most famous music schools in the world. Only the most talented musicians were accepted there. It was harder to get into Juilliard than Harvard or Yale. "Juilliard?" Richard repeated. "You went to Juilliard?" Marcus nodded. "I had a scholarship. I was studying to become a concert pianist." Richard felt his legs getting weak. He sat down heavily in his chair, staring at Marcus with new eyes. A Juilliard student working as a janitor in his building. The irony was so sharp it cut like a knife. "What happened?" Richard asked. "Why are you here instead of performing in concert halls?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "My mother got sick. She needed expensive treatment and I had to quit school to work. I've been sending money for her medical bills for the past 3 years. The simple words hit Richard like physical blows. Here was a young man who had given up his dreams, his career, his future, to take care of his mother, while Richard had inherited millions of dollars and spent them on expensive cars and houses. Marcus had sacrificed everything for love. Richard thought about his own mother, who had died 5 years earlier. He had been too busy with business meetings to spend much time with her in her final months. He had paid for the best doctors and the most expensive treatments, but he had not sat by her bedside holding her hand. Money had been his way of showing love, but it was not the same as being present. "I'm sorry," Richard said, and he meant it. "I'm sorry about your mother," I'm sorry about your music career. I'm sorry about everything." Marcus looked surprised. He had expected many things from Richard: anger, disappointment, maybe more cruel jokes. But he had not expected an apology. In the hallway, people were starting to whisper to each other. The maintenance supervisor was shaking his head in amazement. "I've worked in this building for 15 years, he said quietly. "I never knew we had someone like that working here." "None of us knew," James replied. Marcus never talked about his past. He just did his job and helped everyone else when they needed it. Richard stood up and walked to the piano. He touched the keys gently as if they were sacred objects. "This piano cost me $200,000, he said. "I bought it because I thought it made me look cultured and sophisticated. But I can't even play Happy Birthday on it." He turned back to Marcus. "Do you know how long it's been since anyone played this piano? 3 years. 3 years it's been sitting here, silent and useless like an expensive decoration." Marcus watched Richard carefully. He could see that something had changed in the older man's face. The cruel smile was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "You made this piano sing tonight," Richard continued. "You brought it to life. You gave it purpose." He paused, then added quietly, "You reminded me that some things are more valuable than money." Richard walked back to his desk and picked up the piece of paper he had signed earlier. He looked at it for a long moment, then held it out to Marcus. "A deal is a deal," Richard said. "You impressed me. You more than impressed me. You showed me something I've never seen before." Marcus took the paper but did not look at it. Instead, he looked directly at Richard. "Do you really mean it, or are you just feeling sorry for me?" Richard considered the question seriously. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe both. But I know this. What you just did, what you just shared with me, that took courage. It took talent. It took years of dedication and sacrifice. Those are exactly the qualities I need in someone who's going to lead this company." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know anything about running a company. I'm just a janitor with a music degree." "You're not just anything," Richard said firmly. "And you know more than you think. You know what it's like to work hard for something you believe in. You know what it's like to make sacrifices for people you love. You know what it's like to keep going when things get difficult." Richard gestured toward the hallway where people were still gathered listening. "Look at those people. They've been listening to you for 10 minutes, and they're crying. When's the last time I moved anyone to tears? When's the last time I inspired anyone to feel anything except fear or resentment?" Marcus followed Richard's gaze to the hallway. He could see his coworkers standing there, and their faces showed something he had never seen before. Respect, admiration, maybe even a little awe. "They already look at you like a leader," Richard said. "And after what I just witnessed, so do I." Richard extended his hand to Marcus. "So what do you say, Mr. Chen? Are you ready to stop cleaning up other people's messes and start making some decisions of your own?" Marcus looked at the outstretched hand, then at the piece of paper in his other hand, then back at Richard's face. For the first time since the music ended, Marcus smiled. "Yes, Mr. Hartwell," he said, taking Richard's hand. "I think I am." As they shook hands, both men knew that this moment would change both of their lives forever. In the hallway, the crowd began to clap, slowly at first, then louder and louder, until the whole 40th floor was filled with the sound of applause. Richard gestured for Marcus to sit in one of the leather chairs in front of his desk. For the first time in years, Richard felt like he was about to have a real conversation with another person, not just give orders or make demands. "Tell me your story," Richard said as he sat down across from Marcus. "I want to understand how someone with your talent ended up working nights in my building." Marcus was quiet for a moment, collecting his thoughts. He had never told his full story to anyone, not even his fellow janitors. It was too painful, too personal. But something about this moment, about what had just happened with the music, made him feel like he could trust Richard with the truth. "I was born in a small town in Ohio," Marcus began. "My parents owned a small restaurant, nothing fancy, but it made enough money for us to live comfortably. My mother noticed I had an interest in music when I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old. Richard listened carefully, no longer the impatient businessman who had entered the office earlier. He found himself genuinely curious about Marcus's life. My mother saved money for 2 years to buy me a used piano, Marcus continued. It was old and some of the keys stuck, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She found a music teacher in the next town over who agreed to give me lessons for half price because we couldn't afford the full amount. Marcus smiled as he remembered those early days. I practiced every day after school. While other kids were playing video games or watching TV, I was at that old piano, learning scales and simple songs. My mother would sit and listen, even after working 12 hours at the restaurant. Richard thought about his own childhood, growing up in a mansion with servants and tutors. He had had every advantage money could buy, but he had never felt the kind of dedication that Marcus was describing. When I was in high school, my music teacher entered me in a state competition, Marcus said. I won first place. That's when people started saying I might be good enough to study music professionally. In the hallway, the crowd was slowly getting smaller as people returned to their work. But Rosa, James, Maria, David, and Susan remained, along with a few others who wanted to hear the rest of Marcus's story. I applied to several music schools, Marcus continued. Juilliard was my dream, but I never thought I would actually get in. When the acceptance letter came, my mother cried for an hour. She was so proud. Richard could picture the scene. A family celebrating in their small restaurant, dreaming of their son becoming a famous musician. It was so different from his own experience of being told what he would do with his life, whether he wanted to or not. The first 2 years at Juilliard were the best of my life, Marcus said, his eyes lighting up with the memory. I was surrounded by incredibly talented people who loved music as much as I did. I was learning from professors who had performed with the greatest orchestras in the world. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. What happened? Richard asked gently. Marcus's expression grew sad. In my 3rd year, my mother started getting sick. At first, she tried to hide it from me. She didn't want me to worry about her while I was studying. But when I came home for Christmas break, I could see that something was very wrong. Richard had a feeling he knew where this story was going, and it made his chest feel tight. The doctors ran many tests, Marcus said. Finally, they told us, she had a rare form of cancer. The treatment was experimental and very expensive. Our insurance would only cover part of it. Marcus paused, struggling with the memories. I wanted to stay in school and figure out some other way to get the money. But my mother's condition was getting worse quickly. The doctors said if we waited, it might be too late. Richard found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in Marcus's story. This was real life, real struggle, not the abstract business problems he usually dealt with. So I made the hardest decision of my life, Marcus said. I withdrew from Juilliard and came home. I got a job at a factory during the day and played piano at a hotel bar 3 nights a week. Between the 2 jobs, I could make enough money to help with the medical bills. That must have been incredibly difficult, Richard said. Marcus nodded. Leaving Juilliard felt like cutting off my arm. But what choice did I have? My mother had sacrificed everything to give me the chance to study music. Now it was my turn to sacrifice for her. Richard thought about all the times he had complained, about minor business problems or gotten angry about small inconveniences. He had never faced a real crisis, never had to choose between his dreams and his family's survival. The treatment worked, Marcus continued with a small smile. My mother got better, slowly but surely. But by then, I had been out of school for a year and a half. My scholarship was gone and I couldn't afford to go back on my own. So you came to the city? Richard asked. I came here looking for work in the music industry, Marcus said. I applied to orchestras, music schools, recording studios, anywhere that might need a piano player. But without a degree from Juilliard, without famous teachers to recommend me, no one was interested. Marcus looked around Richard's office, remembering those difficult months. I spent all my savings on rent and food while I looked for work. When the money ran out, I had to take whatever job I could find. That's how I ended up here." Richard felt a deep sense of shame as he listened. While Marcus was struggling to survive and help his family, Richard had been buying expensive cars and taking vacations to Europe. He had never even thought about the people who cleaned his office at night or wondered about their lives. "But you kept playing music," Richard observed. "Even after everything that happened." Marcus smiled. "Music isn't just what I do, it's who I am. Even when I couldn't play professionally, I still needed it in my life. Sometimes I would come to work early and play the piano in the hotel lobby before my shift started, or I would find a practice room at the community college and play for an hour after work." Richard realized that this was why Marcus had been playing his piano that night. It wasn't disrespect or presumption. It was need, as basic as hunger or thirst. "What about your mother now?" Richard asked. "She's doing well," Marcus said with genuine happiness. "The cancer is gone, and she's back to working in the restaurant. She still asks me when I'm going to play in Carnegie Hall." He laughed softly. "I tell her maybe someday." Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you ever tell anyone here about your background? About Juilliard, about your musical training?" Marcus thought about the question. What would have been the point? People see a janitor and that's all they expect to see. If I had told people I went to Juilliard, they would have thought I was lying or showing off. It was easier to just do my job and keep my past to myself. Richard understood. He had created a workplace where people felt they had to hide their talents, where being different or having dreams was seen as a weakness. Besides, Marcus added, some of the other janitors have amazing stories too. Rosa was a teacher in her country before she came here. James wrote poetry for the local newspaper for 20 years. Maria can speak 4 languages fluently. We all have talents and dreams that don't show up on our uniforms. Richard turned around to face Marcus, a new understanding dawning on him. You mean I have been walking past talented, educated, capable people every day, and I never noticed? Any of you? We're good at being invisible, Marcus said with a sad smile. That's part of the job. Richard felt like he was seeing his company, his building, his whole world with new eyes. How many opportunities had he missed? How many problems could have been solved if he had bothered to really know his employees? Marcus, Richard said seriously, I have a confession to make. When I offered to make you CEO tonight, I was making fun of you. I thought you were just another employee with unrealistic dreams. I never imagined you actually had the talent to deserve it. Marcus nodded. I know. I could tell from your voice, from the way you were recording me with your phone. You expected me to fail and embarrass myself. I'm ashamed of that, Richard said honestly. I'm ashamed of the way I treated you, and I'm ashamed of the way I've been treating everyone who works for me. You've shown me something about myself that I don't like very much. Richard walked back to his desk and picked up the contract he had written. But I want you to know that this offer is real now. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I genuinely believe you have the qualities this company needs. Marcus looked at the piece of paper, then back at Richard. What qualities are those? Dedication, sacrifice, the ability to see beauty in difficult circumstances, the strength to keep going when things seem impossible. Richard paused. And the humility to clean up other people's messes without complaining. For the first time since his performance, Marcus laughed. I never thought of humility as a leadership quality. Neither did I, Richard admitted. But I'm learning a lot of new things tonight. 6 months later, Marcus Chen sat in the same office where his life had changed forever. But now, instead of wearing a blue janitor's uniform, he wore a well-fitted business suit. The nameplate on the large wooden desk read, Marcus Chen, Chief Creative Officer. The title had been Richard's idea. CEO was too much, too fast, Richard had explained, but Chief Creative Officer, that's perfect for someone who can see beauty and possibility where others see only problems. Marcus had spent the first month learning about the business side of Hartwell Industries. Richard had given him books to read, reports to study, and meetings to attend. Marcus discovered that his music training had taught him skills that were surprisingly useful in business. The ability to listen carefully, to coordinate complex activities, and to practice until something was perfect. More importantly, Marcus brought a completely different perspective to the company. While Richard had always focused on cutting costs and increasing profits, Marcus asked different questions. How can we make our employees' lives better? How can we use our success to help the community? How can we create something beautiful together? The changes started small. Marcus convinced Richard to create an employee talent showcase, where workers could share their skills and interests with each other. The first event had been a revelation. They discovered that the accounting department had a man who could speak 6 languages, that one of the security guards was a published poet, and that a secretary in human resources had a degree in environmental science. We have been sitting on a goldmine of talent, Richard told Marcus after the showcase. These people have been working for us for years, and we never knew what they were capable of. Marcus had also suggested starting an employee education program, where the company would help pay for workers to take college classes or learn new skills. People don't want just a paycheck, Marcus explained to Richard. They want to grow, to become better versions of themselves. The piano still sat in the corner of the office, but now it was used regularly. Marcus played it during company meetings, during celebrations, and sometimes just when he needed to think. Other employees had started bringing their instruments to work too. The building often filled with music during lunch breaks and after hours. Richard had discovered that he loved listening to music while he worked. It made him feel calmer, more creative, more connected to the people around him. He had even started taking piano lessons himself, though he joked that he would never be good enough to play in front of anyone. The biggest change, however, was in Richard himself. He had started spending time with employees at all levels of the company, learning their names, hearing their stories, understanding their dreams. He found that when people felt valued and respected, they worked harder and more creatively than they ever had before. You know what I realized? Richard said to Marcus one afternoon as they looked out at the city from their office window. I spent 45 years of my life being lonely, and I didn't even know it. I was surrounded by people, but I never really connected with any of them. Marcus smiled. My mother always said that music is the language of connection. When people share something beautiful together, they become friends. The company's profits had actually increased since Marcus joined the leadership team. Happy employees worked more efficiently, came up with better ideas, and stayed with the company longer. Several major clients had commented on the positive changes they noticed in the company culture. But the success that meant the most to Marcus was personal. His mother's medical bills were finally paid off, and she was able to afford the best, continuing care. More importantly, she had been able to attend Marcus's first company presentation, where he had outlined his vision for making Hartwell Industries a place where people could grow and thrive. I'm so proud of you, she had whispered to him after the presentation. Not because you have an important job now, but because you never stopped being the kind person I raised you to be. Marcus had also been able to return to music in a new way. He gave monthly concerts in the company auditorium, which had become popular events that employees' families attended. He had even started teaching piano lessons to the children of employees, passing on the gift that his own mother had given him years ago. One evening, as Marcus was getting ready to leave the office, Richard stopped by his desk. I have something for you, Richard said, holding out an envelope. Marcus opened it and found a letter from the Juilliard School of Music. It was an invitation to perform in a special concert honoring alumni who had made significant contributions to their communities. How did you arrange this? Marcus asked in amazement. Richard smiled. I called the school and told them about one of their former students who had become a leader in business, while never giving up his love of music. They were very interested in your story. Marcus looked at the letter again, hardly believing it was real. This is incredible. Thank you. There's more, Richard said. The company will sponsor your performance, and I want you to know that no matter what opportunities this might lead to, you'll always have a place here. Marcus felt tears in his eyes. Richard, I don't know what to say. Say you'll play something beautiful for them, Richard replied. "And remember that you changed my life that night when you played for me." As Richard left the office, Marcus sat down at the piano and began to play. The music filled the room just as it had that first night, but everything else was different. He was no longer an invisible janitor playing in secret. He was a valued leader, a respected colleague, a person whose talents were recognized and celebrated. More importantly, he had learned that success was not just about achieving your own dreams, but about helping others achieve theirs too. The cleaning crew still worked in the building at night, but now they were part of an educational program that would help them advance to better positions. Rosa was studying to become a teacher again. James had published a book of his poetry. Maria was learning computer skills that would help her get a job in the business world. As Marcus played, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The pain of leaving Juilliard, the years of struggle, the night of fear and hope when he had accepted Richard's challenge. All of it had led to something better than he could have imagined. The music soared through the office and out into the hallway, where a few late-working employees stopped to listen. They smiled as they heard the familiar sound of Marcus's playing, knowing that they worked for a company that valued not just their labor, but their dreams, their talents, and their humanity. In the distance, the city lights twinkled like stars, full of other people with their own struggles and dreams and hidden talents. Marcus played for all of them, for anyone who had ever been told they were not good enough, not important enough, not worth listening to. The music was a promise that beautiful things could come from the most unexpected places, that talent and dignity existed in every person, and that sometimes all it took was one moment of courage to change everything. As the last notes faded into the night, Marcus knew that his real life's work was just beginning. He was no longer just a musician, or just a businessman. He was something new. A leader who understood that the most important job of any company was to help people become the best versions of themselves. The piano fell silent, but the changes Marcus and Richard had started would continue to grow, spreading throughout the company and beyond, proving that when people are treated with respect and given opportunities to shine, they can create something more beautiful than anyone ever imagined. And in a small town in Ohio, Marcus's mother smiled as she read the newspaper article about her son's success, knowing that the little boy who had practiced piano every day after school had finally found a way to share his music with the world.